Welcome to Independent Thought and Freedom. The issue of reparations for African slavery is becoming a more prominent issue on the global stage today. In the US, it's becoming an issue on the Democratic Party presidential platforms. And just a few years ago here in the Caribbean, in 2013, the 13 English-speaking Caribbean countries, including Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and others, established a Reparations Committee to push and call for reparations on a global scale. Now, not all agree with these proposals, of course, and I believe there are legitimate arguments to be made on both sides. However, passions and sensitivities, also social and intellectual taboos sometimes, prevent many issues from being deeply explored. Now, coming from the Caribbean, which is a major center of the transatlantic slave trade, where we live with the legacy, perhaps more than any other area in the world, I want us to lead and have a deeper debate on the issue, exploring some of the deeper and thornier questions that are associated with the issue. To do so, I am happy to have as my guest today, Professor Selwyn R. Cudjoe. Selwyn Cudjoe is a professor at Wellesley College, Wellesley, Massachusetts. He's the author, most recently, of The Slave Master of Trinidad and a columnist for the Trinidad Express. Welcome, Professor Cudjoe.
Well, good. Thanks for having me, and I've been looking forward to all the discussions. It's good to be on with you.
Yeah, well, I want to start off by congratulating you on your most recent book. You've been undergoing a fairly extensive speaking tour about it. How's that been going?
Yeah, it's been rather successful. We have Glasgow about it. I spoke at UCL in London about it. I spoke in Brixton about it. I just came back from Richmond, Virginia, where the other side of the Burnley family lives. It's been a rather extensive tour about speaking about it. It's been a very successful tour because many people don't know who Burnley is. So the first thing was to let them know who he was.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, even in Trinidad, most people don't know who he is, and he was a major slave owner here, and so that I mean, just
the one objection I've had is interesting enough, both not objection but people's question was my sort of seeing that kind of quoting Donald Woods, his book Trinidad in Transition, who saw Burnley as quote unquote a founding father of the nation, and folks were that myth, they were at a loss to understand that. And then, if you remember the introduction, I sort of said the claim I make, certainly, is that Burnley would have been to Eric Williams. The kind of sway that Burnley had first half of the 19th century was almost analogous to the kind of hold on the public imagination that Eric Williams had between 1955 and
right. So because that idea of a founding father of Trinidad, certainly would have, especially when people didn't know who he was. But as you're pointing out, I mean, in the early 19th century, he would have had that influence. I mean, actually, there's so many intricacies about the island of Trinidad itself that I think the connection is a little.
Let me say that. There's so many intricacies about Trinidad itself because we were talking the fact that he was named a founding father of that era and comparable to Eric Williams, who having the same status. Yeah, and I said there's a question that keep coming up and up and up.
Yeah, but also in Trinidad and Tobago, 1802.
Folks found it a little difficult.
He was here from.
I didn't get you.
Right.
Huh?
I was saying that he was in Trinidad from 1802. That's when he came.
Yes. He from 1802 to he died in 1850. Yes, so that's 50 years.
Right. So, and in many ways, I mean, you point to the book Trinidad in Transition. By Donald Wood, an excellent book from 1968, I believe it was published by Oxford, and
Oxford University Press.
And really, Trinidad changed dramatically during that period. Because, I mean, one of the things, I don't know how much you explore it in your book in terms of the idea that Trinidad is very different from the other English-speaking Caribbean islands in terms of it had a very long Spanish history. Even when the British took over, you had the whole debate about abolition and the model colony, and then later on with the Indian indentures coming, and also the free West Indians coming as well, and settling the place. I'm trying to remember the person that Francis Armitage, the historian Francis Armitage, referred to Trinidad as very much being like a frontier colony, as opposed to, let's say, Barbados or Jamaica or Antigua or St. Kitts with the classic slave society history that looms still so heavily on the population in that way. What's your take on that?
Well, of course, as you know, you're alluding to it, that Trinidad, of course, was a crown colony. So let's take Jamaica and Barbados as slave colonies.
Mm-hmm.
And that their own legislatures, they deliberately did not give Trinidad their own legislature because they wanted to rule it from Britain.
Yeah.
So in this sense, the homogeneity that one finds in Jamaica and Barbados place and are coming here. And so that has a lot of implications for own development. You know, when we talk about discipline and production, tolerance, and all that kind of stuff. I think it inheres in our social history. So in that sense, we're quite different. In that sense, of course, as you know, they made us a model colony. So I can go back to the record and say Q and find out everybody. They go to slave registers, 1813. One of the few, every slave and their families registered there and so on. So Trinidad was very different in that sense. And of course, I think more when I go to New Orleans and I see the compilation of Spanish and then the French and so on.
Yep.
It's more like Trinidad in that.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
History. Now, what is interesting to me, and you don't have the history to sort of record names and so on, is that we don't have even a sense. We don't even have in Trinidad and Tobago a sense of our own history.
That's
so nobody
right.
can understand. It's almost my major criticism is when we look at Trinidad, we figure Trinidad began in 1955 when Williams came, as though there's nothing prior to that, and it's not so. So we don't have a sense of the complicated nature of our histories and why we are where we are. So yes, that was that's always fascinating to me. I was at the Bodleian at Oxford about a month ago, looking at some of these original documents, and it's such a fascinating history. But we don't have time for that. We don't have a sense of that, and so I know you like Mr. Naipaul. He talks so much about a sort of pick-a-own society and so on, and you talk about which I don't like. What's the title of your book? The title of your last book?
The last book. Let's see. It was
your book.
Oh, my book. Oh, Politics in a Half-Made Society.
Your book, half-made. Yes, is a term I don't like at all. I don't think societies could be half-made. Societies are. But again, what you were trying to capture, I think, is the notion, of course, always reaching for and so on. So that always fascinates me. And I think that unless we understand our history, like I wrote something, we saw my piece yesterday on Elton Nelson, a fellow teacher from Pure BC School. And I went back in terms of he and I, and quite a few of us, came through the monitorial system. I don't know anybody, monitorial system in Trinidad and Tobago. In 1960, there were only 1,000 free secondary school places. So like Hamilton Holden, Progressive, and Osmonds, and all those things were there. Folks going to go to school. So we're not successful, quote unquote, in college exhibition. And what you had was a school leaving certificate. I don't know if you know about that. And through the school living, then of course you become a school leaving, and you get a certificate, and then you become a monitor, then become a people teacher, and so on and so forth. And the point I'm making is if you look at the essay that I ended the last talking about, that system goes back to 1851 under Lord Harris and the question of the ward system. Nobody knows about it, nobody cares about that type of thing. But if you knew and one cared about that, you'd begin to understand the implications for our own social in education development, etc. So to answer our society, I don't really understand all of those things that go to make us who we are.
Well, I think I might have missed some of it because the connection appears to be fluctuating. But I know you're talking about going back to Lord Harris, 1851, and the school leaving certificate.
No, I'm saying that I wrote an essay yesterday on it. Yeah, but I'm saying that we're just talking about our not knowing our history.
Yes,
I'm just
absolutely.
Located now simply the educational dimension. The health lesson we taught at QRBC, but we all went through that monitor system, pupil-teacher system. And the only point I'm saying, that has its origins in Lord Harris's educational ward school systems from 1851.
Right, right. And I
so if I'm going to get you.
Yeah, so I said I wanted to, there's a personal connection with this biography with you, correct?
Yes.
Because, so can you explain that personal connection? Because this isn't just an abstract study you're doing. You really have some personal involvement.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's like I sit right in my house right now. This is my mother's house. It's built of tapia.
Right.
All right. I hope you know what tapia is. You can dance the tapia? You can dance the tapia?
I personally can't, but...
But you know of it?
Yes, I know of it. Which is, for our international listeners, it's
where I'm right now.
Yeah.
And so you asked me about the personal connection with my book, Burnley, and my family. The home I sit in, of course, my father built this out in about 1940. But we all lived in Tagarigua on the plantation. The big plantation was the Orange Grove plantation.
Right.
There were many plantations, El Dorado, Macoya, Paradise. It was all because Trinidad was a sugar colony. Right. And this area, that flat, undulated lands where you grow sugar, there were a lot of plantations in the Northeast, going back from Latin right up to Aruca, Bonnier, and so on. Of course, so Burnley owned this plantation, and we rented from Burnley. But the connection being that my great-grandfather was born in 1833 in Tagarigua.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, my grandmother, who came from Barbados, it's over a small island, she came from Barbados.
Right.
She was born in 1837. Right. Never left the place. I remember seeing my grandfather he had a man bike, those rally bikes?
Yes.
Going to the estate, right in there with his back hunched over and going to the estate. So we all worked on the estates.
Right.
But not my father. He was a teacher at Tagarigua Presbyterian School under Miss Blackada. Blackada Memorial of 1884. That was she was in the Morton Presbyterians. My father taught under her. All right.
Now,
he didn't work in the
were your ancestors enslaved by Burnley on the estates or not? Or they came from?
Well, he was enslaved. By that time, of course, slavery had ended.
Yeah, in 1833.
And what Burnley was saying, remember that all repaired. They had repaired. I mean, I could only go back to 1833 when my great-grandfather was born. You see, how do I know that? I know it because he had a notebook from 1817. I mean, he's one of the few guys who could read and write. Yeah. And those copybooks? Yeah. The copybook and wrote down my father was born and so on. So we have that. I have that record. So I could go back with all surety and says, yes, I could locate myself in slavery. I'm one of probably the few people in the society who could locate an unbroken line back to slavery. Yeah. I've always made the connection that I grew up in slavery. And when I look at my life, I was born in 43. And I am almost willing to bet the life that I lived then was the life that the slave lived. In other words, our house was the last house to the river. When I went to school, for example, we had to plant up our gardens, the provision grounds. My grandfather had provision grounds up in Cora. That's where they had the provision grounds. We used to go up there and so on. So
how far was it to go?
And why not? The river?
Yeah, how far was it to go to the plantation ground? Yeah.
10 minutes because the what? The provision ground?
Yeah, how far did you have to travel to go there?
It would have been about half an hour. We used to go up there to bathe. You know, you all go up to Cora now.
Right.
Right on the Cora, in other words, that on the, those rich plains. We used to go up there and steal mangoes. Everybody had, you know, this primary larceny when you steal from people's gardens.
Yeah.
We had our gardens up there. In fact, my grandfather, I did a tape with my uncle, and they had a, horse and cart and whatever. They'd pick up the family on the weekends to go up and plant.
Right.
So that would have been about, I would say, half an hour.
Right.
But it was all forested.
Yeah.
So they all planned up there. The interesting connection, which is interesting in terms of what you're asking, and that connection again between my grandparents. At one level, is specific in that we lived on the lands, but at the other level, is general. Because one of the things, as you know, and we always get this wrong in our history, and I have problems with my friends, is that once slavery ended, the blacks began to bargain for wages.
Yeah.
Which, of course, they began to bargain, so it took up the cost of labor.
Yeah.
Simple economic fact. When you bargain for wage, it carries up the cost of labor. The planter, being a capitalist, of course, he wants to keep down the cost of his production. So what the slaves began to do, the question of task work. I'm from, everybody work at task. Yeah, they say, I guess, you work at 2 hours and you take a business, come back home. And what, of course, the slaves began to do, the enslaved people began to do, who was now free, they all had their own provision ground. They worked for 3 or 4 hours, and they went back to the provision grounds.
Yeah.
But that withdrew labor from the sugar estates. And they gave the orders that they're going to smash up all of these plantations, they're going to burn it down, so they could get these workers back. And I'm saying that my grandparents had their provision grounds, and they became a part, they suffered from that. The second thing is, I said, I knew the house in which Burnley lived.
Right.
Is the Tagalogos in the Savannah. In fact, the last remaining remnant, and when I do my lecture, I have Casabon in 1849 did a painting because Harris, Burnley and others gave them commissions, gave a guy like Casabon commissions to paint and so on. Right. And Casabon will have a painting of Burnley's mansion, one of the biggest mansions in the country. Even these people like Mr. Carmichael will come from St. Vincent. They all would speak about it. In point of fact, L.A.A. de Vertai's book on geography cites one of the most beautiful, Augustine's plantation, one of the splendid homes of the country at the time because he was the richest man.
Yeah. And
I grew up as a boy seeing that. I grew up seeing that house at Passy. They play football and cricket on the savannah. There's one remaining tree called a Kuli Pistachia. That's how we call it. Yeah. That's there from the original. I wanted to put a placard. I still want to do that below it. So there were these connections that, as I said, made it not some kind of abstract work of some planter, but somebody who was very instrumental in my life. Yeah. The second point I make in a lot of my lectures is that the notion that the planter is a fool and stupid guy is nonsense. Yeah. He went to Harrow. Harrow and Eton were the leading public schools in England. He was being prepared for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Secondly, his sister Maria married Joseph Hume, who was one of the leading legislators in the British Parliament. Hume was a personal friend of Ricardo, Labour Theory of Value. He was a personal friend. In fact, when Ricardo died, about 10 people followed the funeral, of which his brother-in-law was one. Right. And so on. So this is the guy, he met de Tocqueville. He read Democracy, met de Tocqueville in France, talked about the book and so on. So he was a very learned guy in the sense that I always make the allusion to Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, quote unquote, the father of the American Constitution, was no fool. He had his slaves. Sally Mary had kids with him, but he was also a leading thinker of the time, which are not kind of contradictory. So I try to make that point to make you understand that you're not looking at some sort of gross. Certainly, Burnley was very racist, and he says it in a lot of his writings and so on. But in terms of the connection, I have that sort of personal connection with him. I'm trying to work through some of these kinds of contradictions.
Right. Yeah, and I mean that makes the book, I think, even more special in that sense, because your own personal journey is tied tied to that story. And I mean, your personal journey is interesting, and I would like to explore it a bit, because it does speak about, I suppose, post-emancipation and independence and so forth, because your life spans those areas. And now, unlike the more famous stories, I suppose globally they're still obscure stories of CLR James and Eric Williams, but for us they're the more famous stories. But your path is not quite that path. It's not the Island Skull, QRC, Oxford path. You have achieved a prestige, academic prestige abroad, but yours is a different story that I find very interesting, through Wellesley and Fordham University. And you've spoken about a leg injury at the age of 12 that was an important turning point in your life. Can you elaborate on that for me?
Yeah. Until I go back again, I grew up in Tagarigua.
Yeah. And
as you know, the Tagarigua Orphan Home is called the Cudjoe Orphan Home.
Right.
It was built in 1857 by Burnley's son, Frederick Burnley. And Eccles, they're the ones who, I'm just a walking block. I can look at the orphan right there.
Yeah.
And so the kids who the parents died at the Kalapani, who in fact might have been whatever, they were brought to the Tagarigua Orphan Home, which is the Tagarigua Cudjoe.
Right.
At that time, Miss Tracy, there were 3 social workers: Tracy, Miss Rankisoon, and Audrey Jeffers.
Right.
They were the 3 early social workers. Again, we don't give them no thing, but they're the ones who talk about social work. Miss Tracy was the manager of the Tagarigua Orphan Home. And what she did, she opened the doors. So there was a kind of free flow. I almost grew up in the orphan home.
Right.
They go where you could eat there, you could do what you want, you could bathe there, and so on and so forth. But I also played soccer there. We played soccer. And one day I was playing soccer, and I got a kick on my left leg. And this is what colonialism really means. I got a kick on my left leg, and there was a fellow called Dr. Littlepage. He must have gotten his graduate degrees in the 1930s, his medical degrees. So my leg began to pain. I went to Indian Masua, again from Tagarigua. My Paradise on one side, El Dorado on one side, Dinsdale. I grew up by my neighbor. He's a Hindu. You see the flags. When my mother died, she came and sat with a whole full cherry and sat at my mother's coffin for about 4 hours. Would not leave. Only know his neighbor. That next thing, you only know neighbor. Mm-hmm. My father said taught under Miss Blackana, the Memorial Presbyterian. So, only point. So they took me to a monsieur, an Indian monsieur, but they didn't get better. Clack, 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 clack. So after a while, they rushed me to the Tunapuna Hospital. It's broken down now. The Tunapuna Hospital was on the Tagarigua Hospital on Tunapuna Road, El Dorado Road, where Lloyd Best, Lloyd Best. Yeah. On that street at Tunapuna Road. And that street was the Tunapuna, the Tagarigua Hospital. They take me there. And meanwhile, I'm beginning to talk the man by the cow and the moon and all kinds of nonsense because I'm beginning delirious. What happened? I got kicked. Instead of doing a little slash and letting the poison come out, they did nothing with it. So meanwhile, I'm getting blood poison. And the left tibia, I have osteomyelitis of the left tibia and fibia. And I'm dying. Mm-hmm. When they saw I was dying, as my headmaster came in, they said, my eyes turned. People, your eyes turn, you mean you're gone. Yeah. And they rushed me from the Tunapuna Tagarigua Hospital in Tunapuna, El Dorado Road, to Port of Spain General Hospital. I'm delirious. Eyes turn a dead end. You know the term dead end? A dead end. Yes. And fate would have it. There were at the time 2 bone specialists in Trinidad and Tobago. One, Dr. Watson, an Australian, a tall Australian, and Dr. Richardson at San Fernando General Hospital, the 2 bone specialists, osteo whatever specialist. Yeah. And when I got into Port of Spain, as fate would have it, Dr. Watson was on duty that evening. Mm-hmm. When they got me there, this Dr. Little Page, who used to give you, for everything you had, he used to give you, I once wrote a short story about that. He used to give you a tablet for everything you had.
Right.
Give me a pink tablet and put a big band around my chest and say that my mother beat me and broke my ribs. If my mother beat me and broke my ribs, at least take out an x-ray.
Yeah.
So the first day Dr. Watson get that shit out of the guy's chest, and he took an x-ray and performed emergency operation at the same time, where he bored about 6 holes in my bone to allow the poison. And he put in, they started with first cotton gauze for about 2 weeks. After they take it out, and he put in Vaseline gauze. And I was at the hospital for like 2.5 months.
Right.
That was October, November, and we didn't have to come the same time to visit the hospital because they just won, the Pennant just won. And I was in hospital when, in 1957, George Bailey won Banner the Way back to Africa. And I saw it from the rails of the Colonial Hospital. So that became very important in the sense that it shaped my entire life.
Okay.
Now, I was put in a condemned ward to die.
All right.
Because Ward 9 was the condemned ward. You were going down the road.
Wow.
Now, what was interesting about that, a lot of guys were dying. Every night, you hear somebody jump off. I have given people, at the age of 12,
Yeah.
You know, so I've taken bedpan at 6 o'clock and 10 o'clock, he's dead. So it's almost you go to a battlefield and you're forced to grow up. So when I came out of hospital, I was much more mature in my age and my emotional maturity than the ordinary 13-year-old. And that set a whole different course in terms of my own path of development. So that, first of all, forget about the adequacy of the health system. Luckily, and of course, he was a true every day. What goes on here? We never paid a cent. Dr. Watson would come to the hospital because they left the hole open because they had to drain. He would put his long Australian nose into that wound to see if it's getting tetanus or whatever. Every day I knew he was coming down, and that was devotion to craft and to profession. And I stayed there for 3 years. It took about 3 years before it finally got better. But and what it did, it prevented me from going on to a high school because I couldn't go on to high school like that, right? Because I was hospital for, like I said, about 6 months, and then of course it took another 3 years. So that's why I went through that system of the monitorial system and so on. So that was a very decisive, definitive part of my life.
Wow! No, yeah. That's a quite incredible story there, and you ended up going to Fordham University in New York.
But that's a whole other story. The other story there is that, as I said, that's why I said I should read my article yesterday. I came to the monitorial system. I became, first of all, a monitor. I don't even know what a monitor is. He'll assist the teachers in teaching.
Right.
And when they get their salaries, they pass around a hat. When I put a shilling, they put a 12 cents and so on, and that would be your pay. So you get a $3 or $4 for the month. That's how you got paid.
Right.
And then you become a pupil teacher. Again, still using that same old system. And then I did law part 1. You had to do, you could come through, you could have your senior whatever, your Cambridge or whatever certificates.
Yeah.
But you could also do law part 1, law part 2, then it's a big, I think, a comprehensive exam, and then you become a teacher. Right. I did law parts 1 and law part 2, which I was successful at. And then I began to do a Wolseley Hall course. I don't know Wolseley Hall from Oxford, which is sort of those courses. We have it called. You have it online courses now, but
yeah, like distance learning sort of thing.
It was the Wolseley Hall course from Oxford. And I did English literature and I think English language and something else, and I passed. I got whatever that. That's what you got when you do those things. What do you do when you go to senior Cambridge? Whatever you got. So I got a diploma. You got what do you all got when you do how should I call it? When you do senior, you get first class, third grade, and what those things are on your school.
Cambridge.
And then of course you had the people like Lloyd Bess who got the fellows who got the kinds of exhibition. But at any rate, I did that, and at about the age of 18 or 19, I decided I want to go to the States.
Right.
Because England was not in my horizon. So I left Trinidad and had a wonderful teacher, Cecil Life, and I talked about him yesterday. He was a renowned scholar and a headmaster. And he I said, Mr. I feel like I have a chance because you worked with me when I did my GCs.
Right.
I did a GCs. We did Shakespeare, Merchant of Venice, and all that kind of good stuff. We also did Paradise Lost by Milton, Book 9. If I can obtain for my celestial patroness who deigns a blessing. So I had 2 or 3 of those GC type things. So I go to the States. When I get to the States, I hadn't been to a lab. I don't know what a scientific lab was.
Right.
So I didn't do American history. So in order to get into I didn't even know what university was because nobody here went to university.
Yeah.
So I didn't know what a university was. All I knew was Howard. Because at Christmas time, people send greetings from Howard. Hi, Ma. Hi, Pa. You probably don't remember that. But it was sending greetings. So I wanted to go to Howard just to come and say, hi, Ma, hi, Pa. So in fact, no, it sounds funny, but it's true.
Exactly.
And I go up there and I go to something called Borough Hall Academy for a year in Brooklyn to get the science pass through my science and to the American history. And then
did you have
I applied to St. John's. What?
Did you have family in Brooklyn?
That's the route. That was the route. Everybody had family. My family on my mother's side all went to New York and Brooklyn. So that was the part on my mother's side. So my brother didn't want to go, so I went. In fact, I wasn't supposed to go, but my brother, he wanted to gamble and play card and things. So I went.
Right.
So after a year, again, I couldn't understand the credit system. I came from a British system where if I get more marks than I brighter than you.
Yeah.
How can somebody I beaten in class, I get 90s and he get 80 and he's gonna graduate and I can't graduate. I didn't know anything about the credit system. I just know I brighter than you.
Yeah.
So I was bold enough. I went up to the principal. I know we were bold-faced. I did a piece on James. You remember that on New Left Review on top about the audacity of it all.
Yes.
Caribbean people are audacious. I remember asking James why he wrote World Revolution. And he said, James get to London in 1932, and by 1935 he writes World Revolution. I'm interviewing James, just I did on the video. And I said, well, why do you write World Revolution, Trotsky and so on? He says, very casual, there's nobody else to do it. There's nobody else to do it. Yeah. But that's a kind of audacity. That's a kind of audacity.
Absolutely.
That's part of the person. You find the same thing in Marcus Garvey. Yeah. I mean, you don't know anybody, but you go on. So the audacity there. So what I did, I went to the principal. I said, listen, I'm doing better than these people. And they graduated. I know I have to wait another year because I have to wait for 2 years. He said, if you think you're so smart, go and do the GED. Go to it was held in Hoboken at Stevens Institute in Hoboken, New Jersey. Mm-hmm. And I went and did my GED, and that was based on percentiles. And I got in all of the things I took 95. You know what percentiles are? You're better than 95% of the people. All of them I got about 95, 96. So I was better than 95 when 96% of the people took like that.
Yeah.
Didn't know what percentile, but I got it in my pocket. Again, ignorance is bliss. This is 64, 65. The first Civil Rights Act is passed in 1965. Yeah. I don't know what discrimination is. I went to school, William Middle Home, same class, white boy. Kumar Gaburan is my partner. So the question of race did not think with me. I don't know what racism is. I from Tagarigua, either pass or fail. Kumar's coming and eat. I go along by Kumar. I go by William Milo, who of course he's now in Australia and so we're all in class together, Kidakria Chinese, so that's again our peculiar history. So the question of race and that I don't know what that means. I go to the States, I don't know what racism means. Yeah. So I applied to St. John's. I don't know what the race thing and I want to go to college. Yeah. I applied to St. John's. And I didn't hear from them. I picked up the phone and called the dean. Now, you must understand the audacious of this. A black guy in 1964 or 65, pick up the phone and calling the dean of an institution, and you don't know. So he gave me an appointment. I go to see him, but he couldn't understand how I could be teaching at school. I didn't have a degree, because in school in the States, you have to have a degree to teach at the high school.
That's right. That's right.
They didn't understand the GDD and the GC and all them kind of nuts. I taught and had these exams. He said, I'll tell you what. If you go and do the GDD or whatever, and you get 90% in your work, I'll accept you. I put it as here it is, because I got my 90%, and that's how I got in St. John's. Okay. So my first school is St. John's. It's a Roman Catholic college. I mean, they're good basketball people now. And then after the first year, the first time the Jesuit priests go on strike was at St. John's.
Right.
And all I know, again, I'm talking about ignorance. I come from a little village. And all I knew that if these teachers go on strike, St. John's may lose its accreditation.
Right.
Now, me know the big word being there. All I know about my degree wouldn't word anything. So I transfer right away to Fordham. And at Fordham, I do my first degree. And then I get at the end a presidential scholarship to go ahead and do my master's and my PhD. So I took the fellowship. And then, of course, in the meanwhile, I'm going to Columbia. I'm doing Afro-American literature. The scholar there was a fellow called Robert Bone. Did something called the Negro North in America. And another guy who was a scholar on Dickens. The first guy to apply, he did the English working class, written by Engels. Stephen Marcus.
Okay, right.
Was my professor. And under him, and he liked my work. And he recommended me because I was kicked out of Fordham, by the way. Even though I became an instructor at Fordham. Right. I was kicked out because of my black power, because that's black power and all that stuff. And, you know,
so were you associated with SNCC or Stokely Carmichael or?
I know Stokely. And the first article on black power that appeared in the Guardian was a piece by me called Black Power and its Trinidad Links. Right. And what I pointed, which probably people don't know, before Stokely talked about black power, Richard Wright had written a book called Black Power, which he dedicated to Eric Williams.
Right.
And then, of course, Stokely was from Trinidad. Yeah. So I'm making these connections. I knew Stokely in the sense of the Renaissance Ballroom, the party I knew him there and so on. But I was associated with the Black Power movement in the sense that I was fighting to get more black students into Fordham. When I got to Fordham, there must have been about 13 or 14 black students. So my first act was to fight to get more black students. Right. In fact, I married my wife, that she was a secretary in the dean's office. And when she told the dean that she was going to get married to me, he said, I wish you the best of luck. All right? So therefore, my fight was the level of the schools. I knew Black Panthers. I associated with Black Panthers. The Nation of Islam. I always became a member of the Nation of Islam. Right. Because the mosque, the Nation of Islam mosque, was 116th Street with people like Farrakhan and all those guys at the time. So I was very much closely associated with the Black Power.
You would have been in New York when Malcolm X was assassinated then.
Fascinating. When I got to New York in '64, and Malcolm was shot in '65. Yeah. The Order Ballroom in '65. So I was part of the scene. I knew members of the Black Panther. I know Trinidadians who were members of the Black Panther who lost their jobs because of being members of the Black Panther. In my class at Fordham, there were undercover cops in my class. Right. Because I was head of the student leader and all that kind of stuff in my class at Fordham.
So here you are. You've grown up in Tacarigua on the estate of the largest slave owner in Trinidad, and then you make your way to America and discover race and get into the whole civil rights movement and scene, and you study Afro-American literature. And I want to get into this. We need to talk about the reparations aspect, but this is interesting about your personal story on all this. Gives it that human dimension, and because then at Wellesley you then have a very long history at Wellesley in what was Black Studies and then became Africana Studies, which I always found curious, because Wellesley is, what is it Catholic or no Methodist or something?
It's a women's college. Yeah, there's no religious affiliation.
There's no religious affiliation, but it's a women's college, and it's very, I suppose, white. In that sense, it's not part of the sort of black school system as far as I'm. It sounds unusual that it would have, you for so long, Tony Martin, a very strong Black Studies Africana department. And I've always found that curious. Can you explain to me why Wellesley has such a, distinguished Africana Studies department and how that started?
Well, I mean, again, all this is sort of serendipity and how things happen, you know, or sometimes the laws of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
When I left Fordham, I went to Cornell. The Africana Studies was, again, people like Walter Rodney would come through, John Henry Clark and so on. Cornell was, Wally Soyinka was a place which was almost the one bed for a revolutionary. All of those people came through. I was on the faculty there at Africana, so I knew all of these guys. I mean, it wasn't, you know, I was at Cornell. I get my PhD at Cornell, then I go to Ohio for a year, but I hated Ohio. It was the whitest town, there are no black women there, no black church, so I want to get the hell out.
Okay.
I leave and I go to Harvard. I spent 5 years at Harvard.
Okay.
In point of fact, you would not want to believe it, but when I applied for my job at Harvard, myself and Skip Gates, Henry Louis Gates, my dear friend, who was very big, I got the job. Skip didn't get the job. Skip was coming from Yale. I'm coming from Cornell. But of course, I don't think Skip really wanted a job. Only used the job because Skip was thrown out of Yale. So I go to Harvard, and Harvard again at that time. Remember we're talking about a bed where people, a place which is in very in turmoil, intellectual otherwise.
Yeah.
At Ohio, I'm there for a year, and there's a cell. There is a cell there from the ANC. There's an ANC cell there.
Okay.
And we are now working at Harvard, for example, in terms of reparations, in terms of getting the people out of South Africa, because at that time we never thought South Africa would be free. I worked with people like, say, Hugh Masekela's sister, who was a member of the ANC. So it was an ANC cell. I'll tell you something which probably people don't know. While we were there, Alfred Enzo, or Nizo, who was the head of the ANC, he was on top of Mandela, comes to Ohio because we were raising money. The American Communist Party with Gus Hall and those guys are very prominent in Chicago. Enzo comes to Ohio, and I'm going up to Harvard, and we travel to Boston to Harvard together. He gives a speech. There were only 75 people there.
Yeah.
And of course, at that time we wear Lenin buttons because the ANC were Leninists at the time.
Yeah.
And we come and talk after he comes, he speaks. And then, of course, when I get to Harvard, the first bill to take away, what the word they use. If you go on the records at Harvard, my speech in terms of Harvard pulling out of South Africa, my speech is there. So we begin to fight, even though wherever I was, we were always fighting for the liberation of black people. So remember that cell in Ohio. I know Walter Rodney very well because Walter would come up to Cornell. And I remember writing with Walter Rodney from Cornell. He was going to jump to this guy, Carty.
Right.
Carty's house. He wrote that book on, he was a professor at City University, whatever Carty was. And I'm coming on a Greyhound bus.
Right.
Coming from Cornell, because he was coming to Carty's house in New York. And we told him his book. He said, you know, this is sent it too. He said, I've just published his new book about how Europe underdeveloped Africa and so on. Yeah. It was first published by a small Google Overture out of London. And we talked about the book. So all of those guys, we were part of that big movement. When this guy comes into New York, a bishop, before he's overthrown, I'm on the delegation to meet Bishop because he speaks at Hunter College. Right. So I'm trying to say I'm a part of all of that struggle, be it NC, be it whatever those struggles are. I aligned myself with those struggles, overthrow be it apartheid or racism or what have you. My contract, now what Harvard did at the time is that Harvard would give you a first 5-year contract, and then they would let you go. And then you go out in the world and make your way, and then they call you back. There was no internal. They couldn't start as an assistant professor at Harvard, associate, and become a full professor. Not at Harvard at the time, but they give you a whole year and so on. So I went through that system. And when I left Harvard, I came back to Trinidad for 5 years. Could not get a job at UWI. All right, so there was 2 Marxists, 2 left. I don't call names and all that kind of stuff. For 5 years, I did not get a job in Trinidad. I had to go back to Cornell every summer to work. And I began to work with some Indian people up in the hills. We're trying to get back the land from, but this time was home construction. They're stolen people's land. I think they still have a case in court. I've never been to the Trinity Mall. Those lands were stolen from the cane farmers of
Trin City.
cane farm.
Yeah.
Stole those lands. In fact, we took them to court. I took them to court on that. I've never stepped my foot in Trinity and never will. Yeah. And then the question is what to do. What do I do? Because I got a young child, I got a wife. What happened? I can't get a job in Trinidad. I do that back. I don't want to go to all that stuff. We go back up, and my good friend, he's going to retire from Harvard this year. In fact, I should be there next week. He's at they're inviting me a big thing for him. Myself and a fellow called BJ, Theodore J. one of the most brilliant scholars in Afro-American literature. And Skip says, Skip, I don't know Henry Louis Gates. Skip has a very irreverent kind of humor. And he says, you and whatever, in this revolution nonsense, because BJ was working with the workers, he was also a teacher in Nigeria. You guys need to get a job, man. That was Skip. You need to get a job. Skip has got around. And so he said, okay, what are we going to do? And there was an opening as well.
Okay.
Open in Oberlin.
Right.
BJ goes to Oberlin, I go to. And that's how my career at Wellesley starts. I go to Wellesley, the same thing continues. My writings are all there. I pick them up. I didn't have tenure. I go there as a visiting professor, I think, for a year. Woman who was going to take my position left, and I apply for the position again. But I keep up this sort of what I call that sort of revolutionary fervor for the question of pushing black rights. And so with Wellesley, Tony was there.
Oh, so he was Tony there before you, okay.
Because Tony was there for a long time, and the fellow who did a book, another black guy, he's from Guyana. There were two of us with the physicians, and he was at Kentucky. He wrote a book on Africa, on Afro-American stuff. And it's okay, Selwyn doesn't have a job. He has a job as Kentucky. Let Selwyn do the job, because the two of us are the final candidates. And that's how I got to Fordham, to Wellesley. Okay. And so we kept on. But the point is, sometimes you have to make your own space.
That's right.
So that's how I got to Wellesley. And Wellesley was very good to me in terms of Wellesley is a wealthy college. One of the wealthiest colleges in the States. They pay the best salaries of all of the colleges. Very close to university salary. So, and it was good for me. I could do conferences. I did a conference in James at the Women Writers Conference when this guy who did that thing. True now. So I did a lot of work. Well, they allowed me to do. They were very generous in that sense to do a lot of stuff. They funded a lot of things that I did. So I was very happy there.
Well, so let's get to the issue of reparations in this context, because it's important, because you've not only written this book and the life you've lived with a direct connection to it, a lot and very conscious connection to it, and lived one much more than other people, I would say, and you've been tied to the civil rights struggle and independence movements, and these things are very important. So from your perspective today, when you see the reparations movement, how central do you see this in the whole story of things?
It's important, and you begin to understand it when I saw, for example, the students, I think at Georgetown, I've given out $27 each to repairing the hurt, repairing what you've done. And the first thing we have not recognized, and that's part of our sort of historic blindness. Let's just go to the States. The States have never recognized the US of A, the genocide of the native people. Trail of Tears, for example. They've never recognized that. And they've never recognized they've done a great wrong to a people. And if you've done a great wrong, you have to repair the evil. There are different ways you may do it. Every society would work out how to do it. But we've never acknowledged the wrong that's been done against African people in the New World. And I think what's happened now, there's a recognition. I mean, you take the Jews, they got reparations, didn't they? Some people in Kenya, with the Mau Maus who were fighting, they got because they could identify as So it seems to me that the act of repairing, from which the word reparation comes, is a very important gesture in terms of making whole to the degree one can a process that went awry. So to me, reparations is essential before we could move on.
Now, do you mean now when you're talking about repairing, are you talking about monetary reparations or?
Doesn't matter what it is. No. Does not matter. I don't know where we get there. It could be, in other words, something has been done. I mean, you read, for example, I don't know if you read Homecoming, for example, which I'm going to begin my next class with. That is Ghanaian woman and so on. Families have been torn asunder. A major trope in Afro-American literature or African literature is the question of separation, even the history. Separation, apartness, the breaking of a line. And folks are simply thrown. And it's happening right now in terms of the whole question of gentrification. You go to places like New York and all those places, now they're moving back in and taking it over. And nobody has recognized the fact, and of course you see it in terms of the incomes. I mean, the incomes differential between poor blacks and whites and so on and so forth. So I think the gesture of repair, in whatever form it takes, is an important gesture to understand that a wrong has been done. Mm-hmm. And that wrong has to be rewritten. Or if you do it is another kind of question. They take different forms in different places. Now, by that, I don't mean you're going to give Kirk 100 and Selwyn 100. I don't mean that. There are different things you could do. You talked about Sir Hilary Beckles, Britain's Black Death. And you talk about the night 213 when they did that whole thing with the European court taking them, the Caribbean countries taking them to that European council. I just came back from the University of Glasgow. Interesting again how life is a circle.
Yeah.
And the place I spoke in, the hall I spoke in at the University of Glasgow, Frederick Burnley gave £2,000 to that university.
Yeah.
All right, because his son went to Glasgow. I spoke in the hall which Burnley's money was built in. And they recognized, of course, your boy who was his Wealth of Nations, what's his name? Wealth of Nation.
Adam Smith.
Adam Smith. He was the first earliest rector. Adam Smith was the first rector of University of Glasgow. Yeah. You didn't know that. Yeah. And they were able to, this is my other good friend, Stephen Muller. You should look at his report. He did a very important report on that for the university. It's available, I could give this thing. And there is a recognition that because look at these halls and these buildings. We went to certain part of Scotland and all the money is Burnley's. Burnley was one guy. The other guy was from San Fernando. The second richest guy, what was his name? Oh my God, I can't remember his name right now. But a very good friend of Burnley. And he was Scottish. And so he went to build this very big place in our. So the monies directly from slavery went towards enriching these various countries.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
in a very real way. My friend, and my friend here at UCL talking about, they're doing something called Slave Legacies. Nick's last name. But Nick has been the director of that program. And they're trying to see where the money went. So people materially benefited from the slave.
Yeah.
And the slave trade and so on. And Sailor J, your boy. The book on Black Scholars says.
I want to tell you, I'd like to hear your opinion about something. You know, I worked with Lloyd Best for many years. And we spoke about the issue of reparations quite a bit. But one of the things that Lloyd had said, his position on the demand for monetary reparations. Right? Obviously, the historical reckoning and reconciling is something that has to be done no matter what. But I think the monetary issue becomes contentious at the point.
What do you mean by monetary issues? What do you and Lloyd mean by monetary?
Yeah. Well, I'm just stating it as a monetary, as a payment to whom and from whom and so forth. And Lloyd's position was that we have inherited these pieces of earth, you know, and in the Caribbean in particular, and that, you know, not even, you know, Black Americans can say that, you know, that they have whole countries to themselves, and that these are the greatest reparations, you know, one can.
That's a silly argument.
That was his argument. And
that's an idealist argument. It's silly. It's a silly argument. In fact, I'm reading a book right now by Faith Smith in terms of, a guy like Selwyn, who writes on this question. Says whenever we got on the slave ships, the making of people, they're separated from the countries, Yoruba, Igbo, and so on, they begin to bond on the slave ship.
Yeah.
And of course, you come and you give your labor. They say they get these islands as some gift. It seems to me idealistic. What you're saying is that people came, they were ripped apart. I mean, of course, as Walter points out in the history of the Upper Guinea Coast, even black folks, an elite group, participated in the slave trade. But once that has happened, and as Sheila James, who I think is a much more reliable, much more, I think, solidly an analytic person than simply Lloyd, would say that the slave trade built Europe. It built all those cities.
I don't think Lloyd ever argued otherwise.
But I'm saying to talk about the fact, I'm really contesting the position that you got these islands and therefore should be very happy. Well, you got to do what you got to do. In fact, I'm reading Hegel's phenomenology of the mind, and it says you're going to deal with a situation within its time and place.
Yeah.
And so the fact is that we come to these islands, we made it very rich and so on. But of course, a lot of people died, a lot of people gave their lives, a lot of people were ripped off and so on. And it seems to me now, as I said to you, which you probably didn't pick it up, I don't mean necessarily by reparation everybody get $50.
Yes, exactly. That so that's what I'm saying.
University of Glasgow, they come to a big agreement. They're going to help in some whole health facilities and exchange of students. There are things that you can do, but it doesn't mean giving everybody $50. That's not what I mean.
Right. Mm-hmm. But that is actually on that is kind of part of the Democratic presidential debates going on right now, isn't it?
No, that's not it. I mean, I think the question of how we extract from debates what we want to extract from it is very interesting.
Yeah.
In terms of the slaves, I was not aware of it. About 2 weeks ago, there's a big article in the New York Times in which Lincoln, I just thought it was Britain who paid the slave owners to release the slaves. All right, they paid $20 million, etc., right? Even in America, Lincoln paid the slave masters money to release the slaves.
Right.
I thought it was a British phenomenon. There's always so in fact, in terms of the 20 mules, you look at Spike Lee's thing, 20 things that mules were promised to each slave. They never got it.
Yeah.
Slave masters got their money.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of what are you seeing taking place? It's not that the people, it's been brought up, I think, in this sense. And of course, this guy was very big on it too. This Ta-Nehisi Coates, his book on reparations was very important.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's a recognition. A recognition. How it works out is interesting.
Yeah.
But everybody knows being forced to take a position, the Democratic Party, on this very pressing issue of a very large segment of your population who have never been done right, to use those terms.
Mm-hmm.
But the American Constitution, the American people. And they're saying, okay, what's your position on it?
Right.
And what I think it will do, or has done, as we're doing right now, it has spawned a debate on the justice of that position and how it works itself out. If, for example, take a place like Chicago or these underfunded schools, it may mean a recognition that more money shall be placed in these kinds of things, more money is held in these community facilities and so on, that we have neglected these communities for too long. And we've got, in other words, there has to be a plank, I would say, on the Democratic platform that at least attest to this kind of problem and this historic injustice to Black people. So I think that's what's happening. Not that they say they want money.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead, sir.
In the American context, if you want to put it in the American context now, but
you brought it up. I didn't put it in. The Democratic.
I know. So I'm just saying. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just saying if we're talking about the American context now, as opposed to the global, because there are important differences. If we're going to just speak about American, I just want to make that clear.
As opposed to the
global, Caribbean, and then also what it would also mean for Africa as well. But but let's say in terms of the American situation, I know, there are people who have argued about, certainly the Republican Party was built upon that, right? I mean, it was, and the Democrats were the segregationists, and I mean, you would have been there at the time. I mean, John Bull Connor and George Wallace and all those segregationists, Al Gore Sr., Robert Byrd, all those people, were the segregationists, and that I mean, the issue has been. I don't think it's accurate to say that the issue has been ignored. Now, whether enough has been done, whether the right strategies have been
when you say
taken place, and
let me pick it. No, wait. Let me pick it before you move on.
Yeah.
Before you move on, when you said Robert Byrd and all these segregationists. To say what? That they brought up the question of reparations? What's the point there when you're bringing these guys up?
No, I'm not saying. What I'm saying is that that the issue of slavery and abolition and doing justice, this has been an ongoing theme in American life, and I don't think that it's right to say that it has not been looked at all. Maybe one can argue it's not been looked at sufficiently, or one can argue that it's not been looked at in the right way.
I don't accept that at all. I would look at it a different kind of way. In the sense that I thought the switch you're going to make is the Republican Party under Lincoln are the ones who freed the slaves. And up until I would say the New Deal, the black people, even until about 65, voted the Republicans faithfully.
Yeah, and all the first black legislators, congressmen were all Republicans. It was de rigueur for a black person to be a Republican. Up to those.
But that is not the issue. That was quite true. You go to Reconstruction. Some of the first people become governors and deputy governors.
Frederick Douglass.
Segregation.
Yeah.
Well, what about Frederick Douglass?
Well, he was also a Republican. Part of the.
Yeah. Okay. No, but what I'm suggesting, but I don't know. I suspect. I think we should isolate one from the other.
Yeah.
That the Democrats who were segregationists were intent on having a segregated society. Well, Connors and that was his thing. Nobody would come to this door. I was just in Richmond, and I had something called Monument Avenue. And I mean, you have Davis, all of the leaders, which were put in place after 1900, to counteract the movement towards equality. I passed on the street 2 weeks ago, and all of those Jefferson, Davis, Lee, and all of those are glorified. And the big issue is now, what do we do with these statues? And it's another big issue. So it has not been really, it has not been talked about in those terms. The terms of reparation, I mean, of course, we always talk about it, and we need to get back all 50 or something, 50 acres in a mule.
Yeah, 40 acres.
I think it's not being put at 40 acres.
Yeah, that's a broken promise that I think has legitimacy. I honestly believe that has legitimacy. It's a broken promise. It wasn't just like I'm saying was made to slave owners, and promises were also made to the slaves, and I that's a broken promise. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but so what I'm saying, Kirk, is simply this: that while those who brought it up and people like Spike Lee named him his company 40 acres in the mule, so it has not been put on the agenda as such. That is now, I mean, first of all, you may have to get to the whole question of segregation. You go to Johnson, Lyndon B. Johnson, you go to his museum in, I think, Austin. I went down there and saw it. He had a big, with people like Stennis and those guys from Mississippi, had a big fight just to have the segregation laws passed, to say that blacks should be equal. So the fight has been for civil rights and so on. So the energy, if you want to put it that way. And of course, Martin Luther King in the 50s and so on, talk about we have our civil rights, we have to have more rights and so on. So let's put it this way, maybe it's probably one of emphasis. That the struggle thus far in the States has been one of blacks having just their right to vote and the basic human and civil rights.
Yeah.
And I think now the movement has been expanded to talk about how do we begin to repair the wrongs in real terms and particular reason. If we look around at the school systems and the medical profession and so on, those deep divisions are still there. And it can't be, it's not a question of some inherent deficiency among black folks or whatever, because places like Meharry and Howard have put out their doctors and so on and so forth. But of course, it's one in terms of emphasis, in terms of how do you make a very conscious effort to righten that wrong, not by giving people various sums of money, but in terms of the institutions which maintain that, how do we begin to shift that and begin to talk about it? And I think what the Democratic candidates are saying, well, we at the level of the legislature have to set the agenda. I think that's probably how I look.
All right. Okay. All right. Yeah. I wanted to sort of get your position on that, especially, you know, say you've been involved in, you know, as I said, your personal history is, you know, it touches on some of the most important, you know, periods of this, from decolonization. Sorry?
I said I was fortunate.
Yeah. I mean, from decolonization to civil rights and the period afterward. I mean, though, well, decolonization and civil rights are two pivotal.
And one thing I want to say, I didn't go to QRC with Lloyd and others, but part of my high school education or secondary school education was Edric Williams, big marches and debates and so on, and Ella James. They're the ones who sort of, people say who were my idols, the people who gave me the vocabulary and the ability to think about these things and accept these two majors.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and me too. You know, I mean, as a Trinidadian.
And of course, I went to the same school as Lloyd. You know that.
Right.
Same primary school as Lloyd.
Mm-hmm. That's right. But yeah, but he would have been older than you. He would have left by the time you went, right?
No. Yeah. Well. There was a board, again, inspiration, with the ones that won college exhibition.
Right.
And Lloyd Best won in 1943. I was born in 1943, but I see the board up there with his name on.
Right.
These quiet influences are so very important.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And by the way, Lloyd's father worked in Orange Grove.
Yeah.
Same estate when they had one.
Yeah, I'm Lloyd used to tell me the stories, you know, of the cows and how he used to have to mind cows in the morning and these sorts of things. Yeah. You know, and this time, and the fact that, you know, you and he, you know, became scholars and have investigated these things, it really adds a depth to the work, and a very important one, you know, that needs to be acknowledged, and so that's very important. And in terms of you know, bringing the conversation to a close, you know, you have this long history of work that you've been doing in you know, in various different fields, but with a focus, a definite focus. Is there a sort of main message that you would sum up everything that you continually want to give to the world? What is that message that you've been giving?
I don't know if you remember the argument which Williams made in his autobiography about Ella James. A bit of pique, I don't think he was meant it. That James left Trinidad to talk and follow the peculiarities of world history and capitalism and so on. He decided to come home, lay his bucket dog, etc., etc.
Yeah,
I think that that the question of local histories, I think, is what I like to do within my last few years. So I give a prize, even the prize to my primary school, St. Taggart Gracie School. Mm-hmm. Every year I give a prize of about $1,500, the best guy, the best child in the primary school. And this year I'm going to give another one additionally to that, to people who could write about local histories and local communities and so on. I think what it comes down to, at the end of the day, we are citizens of a particular place. I mean, I'm made by Tagarigo, I'm made by the river, I'm made by Cora, I'm made by Bodie, I'm made by whatever. And so I could see no other place than than our local. I think one of the mistakes we make in our, how do you combine the local with the universal and so on?
Yeah.
And so what I'd like to do, I would like to see more work being done on local histories, glorifying and promoting the work of the people whom we know. And through that, I think lifting up what I would call the intellectual and cultural standards of our people. I think part of the big problem we see all this violence and all that kind of good stuff, pouring more money and saying more gun. But it is done about the intellectual and cultural, lift up the intellectual and cultural levels of our people. And you could do that, how you do it? By valuing that which they know. I mean, valuing that what they see. You can't talk abstractly about Australia and England and Chile. When you have people here, if you can't validate the people who are in your own communities, and the work that we have done, that they've done over, history certainly is important. And so I like to do more work on that. And I'm just a believer in sort of local, or Trinidad, I believe that we have not really told our history very well.
Yeah,
and we
I agree.
Ignored our parents. And I think I would like to see more of that being done. In fact, the new work I'm doing revolves around that. The new work I'm doing revolves around local histories. But again, have an international connection. But that we don't see. They're not just simply local. I'll give you one simple story. One of the guys I'm working with, I have about 3 guys I'm working now. There's a fellow called Douglin. You know Douglin, Father Canon Douglin?
Yes.
Head of the Anglican Church, he used to be.
Yeah.
His father was an ex-slave out of Barbados.
Okay.
In the 1940s, not 1940s, around 1950, the Cudjoe College, the Cudjoe gave this big gift of money both to the Bill Cudjoe College and also the All Souls College in Oxford. And what happened, Bishop Roll is the principal of the Cudjoe. And what they'd be excited to do is to send these ex-slaves back to Africa to evangelize the Africans in the Reparations and Sierra Leone areas.
Yeah.
And Douglin was one of those young guys whom Roll loved and sent him back, and he did a big stint. I don't know the whole thing in Sierra Leone as a missionary. Did a lot of, and again, this whole question of translations wasn't J.J. Thomas wasn't the first one. It was J.J. Thomas. This guy went to the Susu language, was translated, but it's a whole other story. And then, of course, he came and went down. He became the first canon in the Anglican Church and became the pastor of St. Clement's. His body is buried there. And he came, and when Sylvester Williams came down in 1901, he was one of Sylvester's main man in Trinidad. He gave one of the very first speeches on slavery. And his point was, in 1888, he gave this big speech. The problem of slavery is not what it did to the body, not the scars or the rush of the blood, but what it did to the mind. We don't know those things. Yeah. And these are the people I think, if we really are serious, if I say Douglin, if I said his name is Douglin, father of the bishop, nobody knows who
I know.
He is. You don't know a thing about him. I said, how does that happen? And you started thinking about somewhere 56 and millions, and I mean, there are people been before.
Exactly.
So you asked me a question, or I'm summing it up. It says knowing our own history is part of my task. I enjoy doing that. I enjoy how do we make the lives of others relevant to what we should know. And if, I think George Lamming in one of his, probably dated of my person, one of the essays or books said, give me an educational system and you can give everything else. Give me the mind, you can give everything else. And so that was what I'd like to really do. So how do you begin to apply all of that to make it workable? I don't know how it's going to happen, but I'd like to see more of that happening. I'll work in my little community and do what I got to do. Through my writings, as I said, that's the work I'm doing right now. In fact, there's a guy called Stanley who was, again, I got all of his sermons, the black guy from Taboos, again. St. Mary's Church, again, the sermons from 1915 to 1960, I have all the sermons.
Right.
And they keep on going. That kind of local work. It's local, but it's international.
Right. And if you had to do your journey over, would you do anything differently?
I don't even know if I'll do it, man. Because when I got to the state, and it was tough. I worked and went to school. No mommy sent me any money. My mother sent me $175 once.
Right.
She don't ever send me any money again. I don't know why I wanted to do it. I was this impulse to do it on my own. I don't know where it came from.
Right.
It was tough. I almost went to Vietnam because you couldn't even. The things was rough. You had to go to school and work 2 jobs, and the summers you do 2 jobs and so on. And I always hated that, and I always said to myself, if I knew what I was going to be, would I do it? And I'm not too sure. And the other thing about that, in doing these things, it sounds glorious, but you gain some things and you lose something.
Yeah.
I mean, you lose in terms of just your family, your kids are abroad, but they're Americans now, so I'm coming back. I'm here. And so you lose that. So you gain a few things and you lose. So there are gains and loses. But my thing is just got to do what you got to do. And that's how life really is.
Well, I mean, and that's something I like to focus on in the podcast when I talk to people, because you're a driven person. You face a lot of challenges in your life, a lot of obstacles, a lot of setbacks, and you have some inner strength, some reservoir that would have taken you over these things that pushed you forward. And I think that's important for people to know about and also to draw upon within themselves. But for you, what has been the source of that inner strength? What has been that drive for you? What has been?
I think that drive comes from my mother.
Yeah.
In the sense that when I would go to school, I couldn't buy a copybook. A copybook was 5 cents.
Right.
I couldn't buy a copybook. I had to get from the neighbor or my uncle. And get your school books, probably have it in some old chest drawer in the school. But my mother always said, if the teacher tells you or told you to read 1 page, read 2. If the teacher says, right, read 1 page, you read 2. And that's the first one. The second one is that there's a very intriguing question in terms of blaming others. And it goes back to the degree of the reparation question, not really blaming others. But we have to take our own destiny in our own hands. And this notion, you can't make excuses. One of the things I love about Trinity, like to figure if they give you a good excuse to answer the question. They like excuse. Boy, I couldn't come because the car was thing. And they figure if they give you a good excuse, they'll solve the problem. You have not solved the problem.
Yeah.
So my thing is, read 2 pages. And at the end of the day, you could blame no one but yourself. But apart from the inner whatever, I think it comes from the joy that you take in doing what you do. Mm-hmm. So I could sit here all day, read all day. When I'm in London or the States, I go to Starbucks. I go there at 9 in the morning and I get a cup of coffee. I read it. Because I find a lot of enjoyment, satisfaction. The quest of knowing, the quest of wanting to know, wanting to discover is so on. So I just think that, and then of course I never wanted to make my mother feel ashamed. I didn't want to do the thing like I'm afraid of the policeman drop in front of your house and don't ever make me feel shame and that type of thing.
Yeah.
So I think those are the things. You didn't want to make your parents feel shame, you didn't want to make your community feel shame. And when I went to Harvard, the one thing I learned from Harvard again is that when you get to Harvard, something happens. You're accused of something. Never say Selwyn Cudjoe. You go to Wellesley. What's a Selwyn Cudjoe? Or Wellesley professor accused of. And this sense of community, this sense of being a part of a whole and doing everything in your power to uplift it and keep it together is something that's kept me kind of going. So I feel very strongly about that. So I don't, that's sort of what keeps me going. It's the strength to do the best I can. And of course, don't become puffy and stupid. Just a regular guy, not that important. You have some knowledge. I got some knowledge. Come on, I got a friend. What's this big game that's making the news now? Fortnite, is that the big?
Oh yeah. All the time we're playing that.
It's Fortnite, right? Yeah. And I remember I have a dear friend. I won't call his name. Lovely friend of mine, best friend, but he's very conservative, very backward. I tell him that, but it's my dear friend. And when they were talking about it, his daughter was not learning Shakespeare, these kids don't know anything this day, and these kids are not. So let me ask a question. His granddaughter's in the back there. I said, let me ask a question. You know what Fortnite is? Yeah, I know what that is. I said, daughter. So, oh, God, Uncle Selwyn, I like that. She plays it all the time. She has her own area of knowledge that she has, by the way.
That's right.
You have your Shakespeare and so on, and you figure you'll learn. There's so much always that you don't know. And that's humility, I think. I think Churchill called it magnanimity, being magnanimous. So I go to meetings, I don't have any person. I go to any meeting I want to go to. I'm not going to be, I have my ability to want to know. So I go to a UNC meeting, I go to a PNL meeting, I go to any meeting. In fact, I remember this guy, Gary Griffith, who was not a big fella.
Mm-hmm.
And about 2 years ago, when his wife was running for the leadership of COP.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And she went to Puno to give a speech. I went to hear her because I want to hear what she has to say.
Yeah.
And here's Gary in the back and we talk about all kinds of things. That's how you get to, you have to open yourself to all of the currents.
Exactly.
And that's kind of what keep me kind of going.
Excellent. Well, I suppose you may have touched on this in your previous answers, but what would you I always like to ask this as well, which is what would you recommend to a young person listening to this podcast?
What I recommend to them?
Yeah, your number one recommendation
is that they strive for excellence, that they think about not about the material things, but the spiritual. I don't mean it narrowly spiritual in terms of church and so on. That we are not just simply all bodies and materiality. There's another dimension, and to try to discern what's important in life. That, in fact, all the blings and the cars and all that kind of stuff, I think was part of our problem. So I just saw IDC report, the kind of monies we hadn't done what we should have done. So I think our problem is too much. It's always what we could get. We could give me. And it's probably Bobby Kennedy would say, ask not, John, I says, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And that sense of what I can do, what I can get, I think is, but a person listening to say, what could I give? How do I realize myself in my actions and in my deeds? How I become faithful to certain, whatever principles you have, you've been faithful to. That is what matters. At the end of the day, the big house and the big car and all them things don't really matter. Because people have all the big things, they're very, very. So look for that dimension. I call it spiritual, not in the sense of the religiosity or the church or whatever. There's another dimension. With St. Augustine, it's body and mind and body and soul and so on. But I think that other dimension has to be given life to. It has to be given intellectual nutrition. So I would look for that. I would say this.
Absolutely.
Don't strive for the biggest house and the biggest car. Strive for the great, for the good people. Ask not how much, but how good.
Excellent. Now, over the next, do you have any plans over the coming year, 5 years? Anything coming up that you'd like people to?
No, like I said, you just do. You impelled. My last book has received a lot of accolades, done very well. And my thing is work, though. I think you have your work to do. That's
yeah.
Important. Whatever you practice. The accolades is sort of by the side, by the way. The Gita, according to Gandhi.
Yeah.
Gandhi did a book, The Gita, according to Gandhi. And he says, strive for equanimity. Strive for equanimity. So I do my work, but I just try, as I said in my thing to your response, hope I have good health and do what I want to do. I mean, I'm not going to do everything I want to do.
Yeah.
But I have no big plan. The plans, I guess, for next year, just try to stay alive and stay healthy. That's really the two different.
Very good, very good.
And do my work, whatever that work is.
Well, I want to thank you so much, not only for this interview, but for all the work you've done over the years. You know? And even where we differ or over various issues, but I appreciate the fact that you seek to keep the discourse high. You know? And regardless of our positions, I admire your hard work, your dedication, your determination, and I really appreciate the dialogue, and I do look forward to having much more. There are a lot of issues that we could delve into more. Unfortunately, really the connection on this call
was not the best.
Yeah, hindered the discussion we could have had. But
we could do it again, but I want to thank you because one of the interesting things I know, and I think you said you interviewed Naipaul. And one of the things about BS Naipaul, I remember when we came down here the last time, and I think Saturday had him, and I think they didn't ask about, and they thought that he would be catering to all of their whims. And he said, "You have not read my book," because he recognized that it was a life of the mind. In other words, the one they have, that's nonsensical, but we should differ.
Yes.
I mean, I have my views of Catholicism, but Ratzinger, which I think is a brilliant Catholic theologian, and it was about Catholicism. I don't have to believe in it, but I have to respect. And it takes someone of your kind of intelligence. I mean, there's a difference in terms of having a debate or discussion with somebody who has the intelligence to be able to deal with issues that allow me to speak. But so I have to thank you for the level of both inquisitiveness, curiosity, and intelligence you bring to your piece. I still use your book. I said I don't read Half-Made Society, but I think it's a very important book in the sense of what you try to say and what you try to do up in my shelf. But thank you for that. But I thank you for the intelligence that you brought to the discussion. Allows us each to speak our truths or whatever. But it takes somebody. So I want to thank you for the work that you've been doing. And certainly, I admire your admiration for Lloyd. I have kind of, we could talk about Lloyd at some other point, but your work is also very important. So you should really keep up doing what you do, because at the end of the day, we shall be saved not by our politicians, but by our intellectuals. In fact, Jose Marti, the great Latin American liberationist, talked about the whole role of the national culture. People who have the kinds of intelligence who disagree, or be disagreeable, people could counter, can I just say one more thing? I remember when I went to London many years ago, and this guy who was in charge of New Left Review, what's his name?
Stuart Hall, was it? No.
No, Stuart. Well, he took me to see Stuart. He wrote this book. What is his name? He did a review on my book. Hold one second.
Sure. Right.
Let's just get his name. Yes, this is Robin Blackburn.
Oh yes,
Robin Blackburn.
Yeah.
Robin, he was the New Left Review, and Robin took me to a debate or something like that with Stuart Hall, and it was a guy from the left from France. I don't remember the title. I always try to remember the title of the book, but it always slips me. And we go there, and I was amazed. There was this very civil debate. It was either left, it was a Marxist, Latin American. And he made his point. Stuart made his point. Then they asked the question. I was amazed at that level of discourse. Subsequently, I became friends with all those guys. In fact, Robin and Catherine.
Yeah, I just lost that little bit. Mm-hmm.
What was that? No, I said what I loved about those guys, and where you could disagree, and we have disagreements, and we don't disagree. I think and that civil discourse, one thing is sadly lacking. And guys like yourself, it seems to me we need to keep that going, so we keep on raising the level of civil discourse and intellectual discourse, and all the rank. So thank you for your work.
Well, that's an unexpected kudo at the end, and I'm very grateful, and I appreciate it. So, and I look forward to continuing our dialogue, even if not on this podcast, but personally as well.
Yeah, we should have Abby here for the next few weeks, so we should probably have a cup of coffee together. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, that's
thanks again. Okay.
Yeah, that's all for Independent Thought and Freedom this week. Please join us again next week, and in the meanwhile, please make sure you subscribe, leave me a rating, like and share this podcast with your friends. Thanks, and bye for now.